Thank you very much, Dan. I'm really happy to be here and excited to be able to share our work. We'll kick right off with, I guess, sharing our screen with our little presentation. We're here today. Anna and I are here to talk to you about co-curating with queer communities, and specifically talking about the Our House project, which was part of Shout Out Loud. So to give you a bit of context, Shout Out Loud is a consortium project about youth voice. It's led by English Heritage, but with our partners PhotoWorks, the National Youth Theatre, Sound Connections, and the Council for British Archaeology's Young Archaeologists Club. And the idea is for, to create platforms and empower young people to tell stories and explore history and heritage in ways that are relevant to them, but also helping us as a sector understand how we can do a better job of engaging and involving young people. So as part of the Shout Out Loud program, we did a project called Our House, or I should say the young people did a project called Our House, which was a kind of, again, another partnership project working with Metro Charity, which is a London and Southeast based LGBTQ+ youth charity, the National Youth Theatre, and English Heritage. And this was about working with young people to explore the LGBT history and heritage of Whyelton Palace, which is, I'll give you a little bit of an overview of in a second. And the participants in the program, and all Shout Out Loud programs, are between the ages of 11 and 25. And for the Our House program, we actually work with quite a broad range of ages and young people. I don't know, Anna, if you want to say anything about that.
Yeah, so thank you, Dominique, and it's lovely to be here for a start. So we then met with Dominique and sort of talked about the idea of Whyelton Palace and the queer history, and how NYT, the National Youth Theatre, could engage its membership within this project. Weirdly and very wonderfully, I just moved into a house opposite Whyelton Palace, so it was really local and knew the history and was really quite excited by this opportunity. So as a queer woman myself, I sort of jumped straight in and also worked with the membership to find and identify 20 young people who identified as LGBTQ+ members, and who would be interested in animating and being a part of this project, not only to perform but also to work alongside eight young people from Metro who they would buddy, as for some of them it was the first time that they would have been on stage or done any kind of performance. So it was a really unique opportunity for our members, so a really fantastic one.
Thank you. So why Whyelton Palace? Not just because Anna lived nearby, it was a very happy coincidence. We have some known queer connections for Whyelton, both in the Middle Ages and in the 20th century. There was a substantial amount of existing historical research, so we had a lot of information and knew quite a bit about the history of Whyelton and it's kind of the people who live there. And of course, it's this really iconic site, but there's a chasm between the local community and Whyelton Palace, where, when you speak to a lot of people in the local area aren't really familiar or aware that Whyelton is there, and don't really know key elements of its history, which I'll just, so before we go into that, I think that's a really important thing. So there is this gap there between the sense of ownership with the local area and this really important site, which, for many people, it doesn't really have a role in their understanding and in their sense of their local area. So why theatre?
Well, good question. Why theatre? Well, it gives you an opportunity to tell stories and explore stories and reinterpret stories for an audience and the young people telling it, or whoever's telling it, to take risks really, and to I mean, at the National Youth Theatre, we're all about taking creative risks with young people, ensuring that they feel recognised and seen within the heritage site. So theatre animates the space. It gives ownership to the young people telling the stories, they can place themselves within the stories, within the site, within the heritage. They can build on the true, real stories that we know from the written history and the oral history of that site, but they can build on it and use their imagination to develop those stories and place them then and now. So it felt like an absolutely brilliant marriage of heritage and theatre. It feels like a great connection, and not just the regular sort of reinterpretation, the historical characters, taking the facts. It's really about expanding the facts and taking it much further and making it relevant.
So Whyelton Palace is a very sort of interesting book. The first mention in the Doomsday Book of, it's actually 1088. I got the date wrong, so apologies for that. It's a typo. Later it was granted to Prince Edward, who became King Edward II. It's got some really important sort of historical VIPs from Henry VIII, and then it was trashed and ransacked following the Civil War. It spent quite a while as a barn in the 18th century, and there's some beautiful paintings of kind of animals lingering around, chewing hay, walking through the ruins of the Great Hall. And in the 20th century, it was purchased by the Courtaulds, Virginia and Stephen Courtauld, seen in the picture on the right with their pet lemur called Mahjong. And it was renovated into this really luxurious Art Deco mansion by the partners, who were a queer lovers, John Seeley and Paul Paget. And they were sort of top London architects at the time. And the house turned into this amazing, it had underfloor heating, it had the sound system in every room. I mean, it's a really, really, I guess these would be modern conveniences now, but to think of them in the 1930s is really, really exceptional. So this place has all of this rich history. It has this vibrancy to it. And everything, and walking around now, it can feel a little bit like a mausoleum. It doesn't really have that sense of life and that sense of excitement. One of the big events that happened in the Middle Ages was a giant feast on Christmas Day with 2,000 people, and that kind of sense of importance, that really important history related to key moments in the history of England. All is the queer elements of that really aren't particularly well covered by the on-site interpretation, or just by a sense of what people, a connection to this place and what it is. So our house came with some challenges, and there were some sort of curatorial challenges in terms of interior of the space. We have to ensure that we conserve the historic fabric, that we don't break things, but also that we don't break the history. That's one of the really important elements for English heritage and for any heritage and museum organization, is this inherent sort of attraction to facts and what is factual. And of course, that's a real problem when it comes to queer history, because often we have to almost forcibly extract these stories from the evidence that were written in a way, or these artifacts or this histories were written in a way to hang on to these things and not want to give up the stories of queer people and other kinds of individuals or communities that were marginalized or persecuted, and these stories end up being suppressed. So what that means in a heritage setting, I think, is particularly interesting and was a big challenge for us. Of course, everybody has different priorities. I think what Anna and the National Youth Theatre and the young people were interested in, you had all different priorities there. I don't know if you want to mention anything about that, Anna.
Yeah, I think for the young people, the challenge really was going into a space where they weren't sure they were welcome. They weren't sure they were seen or recognized. They couldn't see other people like them. And so for them, it was a real challenge to sort of build their confidence to be able to take the space and own the space. And their priority was really to sort of shout out that they exist, and that they're loud, some of them, and that they're young, and and that this space belonged to them as well. So that was a challenge, going into a space that hasn't done a project like this before with young people, and you know, young people do lean against walls and do sit down if there's a chair there, and do want to, you know, make noise and sing songs. So yeah, that was that was a challenge.
I think for us, it was really great to see all of that and to have that, because we become, I think, a little bit obsessive about the pristine nature of everything that, you know, everything that's there. But of course, this was a house that was used in festivities, that had parties, that was lavish, and was about, you know, with the sound system in every room, it was intended to be filled with sound and voices, and it was really incredible to see that. I think one of the other some of the other challenges were about the different priorities, and about how do we mitigate those, how do we bring all of those priorities together and kind of build consensus around that. And what was really impressive, I thought, was the way all the young people sort of came together and did that, and really led that process for themselves, and led the way in which they would work together. The actors from the National Youth Theatre worked together with the young people from Metro Charity, who, you know, who didn't come from an acting background, and for whom acting or theater wasn't necessarily a priority, even if it was the activity they were involved with.
Yeah, I mean, to jump in there, Dominique, it was for the young people from Metro and some of the young people from National Youth Theatre. This project was more about their identity and more about them sort of feeling that they were allowed to be the young people that they were in terms of their identity and gender. And so for some of them, it wasn't about putting on a play. It was much more about being part of a community and feeling welcome within that community. So it was a really extraordinary project in that sense, because it was life-changing. It truly was life-changing for some of those young people who couldn't be the person they wanted to be in any other environment than the place that, you know, we made the rehearsals very safe, and when they're at Metro Charity, they could be who they wanted to be, but not at home potentially.
I think that was also really important. I think that's the most important element of all of this, is that in some ways the piece of theater, the historical interpretation, everything else that we were doing was very much secondary and a really long way down for these young people. But I think it's really interesting the way in which this historical setting was able to be that safe space, and kind of went from that for them from being a place that they felt really alienated from and something that were very apprehensive and very cautious about, to a place that, you know, they felt a great deal of ownership about. Since then, of course, some of the young people from the performance will be on the panel tonight, and so if anybody's interested in hearing actually what they have to say for themselves, please do attend that. I think this is probably a good time for us to for me to ask Dan to play the little teaser video that will give everybody a little bit of a sense of what's happening, of what the play was about, and what it was, and the film for this evening.
We are making a new piece of theatre that celebrates and uncovers the hidden queer history that is located at Whyelton Palace.
I want to create a piece of theatre which makes the people that feel like English heritage sites aren't for them, it's actually their right to be there, because these sites, they are designed for us and by us.
It's owning the queer stories that came with this site, the unspoken story. Queerness is a celebration.
We have to create those conversations. These real life people were never heard, and it feels like it's our responsibility to finally give them a voice and to empower ourselves to have our own voices.
Thank you, Dan. And just moving on, I think, Anna, now we've got sort of the second part of our little talk is for us to have a chat, because I thought that would be nicer for people than listening and watching more panels, you know, slides, not panel like that. So I guess for me, the big question really is, you know, what theater in Whyelton Palace, and why do we use, what was for you the value of Whyelton Palace as the venue for staging a theatrical production?
I think what was brilliant about Whyelton Palace is there is some queer history within Whyelton Palace. So that was an absolutely brilliant starting point. So to be able to read about the architects, to be able to read about the coultards and their extravagant parties and the people that lived there and came and stayed there, it immediately felt there was a way in, and the stories were really rich and really gay, in a fun way, in a loud, and like you said, that the house had sort of underfloor heating, was had sound systems in every room. It felt like it was calling out to be animated and to be filled with music again and filled with words again. And so to then add a group of young queer people to that story, and for them to wander around it and feel connected to it just by some of the stories that were there, Edward and the king and all of those things, for them to have that starting point, to feel like there is some of their history there, it just exploded into being able to find other stories, to expand those stories, to tell those stories, to animate the characters theatrically, to be bold and theatrical. So it felt like a really good unison to use music, to use theatre, to use words, also to really physically connect to the space with their bodies. So really thinking this wasn't a regular sort of proscenium arch theatre piece. The whole point of this was to embrace the building, so to go on a promenade, so to walk through the building, to take the audience on a journey, to unravel the stories that might have happened, so to think about what the servants, the lives of the servants there that aren't documented, some of, there's not documented stories of much of that. So to then for the young people to go, what would it be like to be a young gay servant in this world, compared to the sort of the upper classes that were living here, who were sort of allowed to be a bit more gay then. But so, yeah, theatre felt like the perfect fit, but I'm completely biased as a theatre person. So, but yeah, we exploded the space with sound and words and life.
It's probably the most, I think, alive I've felt, any of our sites really ever to have been, is to have that creativity just completely filling up all of the spaces. We often talk at English Heritage, our tagline is "We bring history to life," and we've often used living interpretation, and we still do at many of our sites, and it's a really great way for people to get in touch with the past. But what I think this captured that I haven't really experienced at any other time, at least not in my career, is the way in which the house sort of, it just became, it sort of felt more itself. It's felt more real and more authentic as a result of the layers of creativity, of imagination and thought and interpretation that these people brought to it. And for me, that has changed from my understanding and the way that I think about Whyelton Palace. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would also say that the creative team that worked on the project, so the Kane Husbands and the Pappy Show, and Ben Salmon, the writer, Tristan Parks, the composer, brought really great ideas to the project too, because they talked about Eltham now. So what is happening in Eltham now compared to the 30s and 20s? And why is it that people literally living opposite don't know Whyelton Palace is there? And how can we bring those people into the site and make it relevant to them? So I think what was interesting was also some of the characters we developed were about the local people that live in Eltham. So as you know, Eltham is a wedding venue. Most weekends, every Saturday, it's given over to weddings, because obviously it's financially the way that organisations survive, is to make some money corporately. So we began the story with a gay wedding, and I don't know whether there's been gay weddings at Elton Palace. I'm not sure. I hope there have been. But it felt like to have a queer wedding with two women getting married, we sort of recognise the fact that it's a wedding site as well now, and how can we have an audience arrive as though they're arriving at a wedding and not know that we're then going to take them. Brilliant. Someone said there's definitely been gay weddings. So pleased. How can we then take them on a journey that they're going to discover the history of this house through stories, but they won't know at the beginning. They think they're at a wedding. So we sort of played with what Elton Palace is now, as well as what it was then, and what we went through is the sort of all the times in history where maybe it's been taken over by soldiers, became an army sort of headquarters for a while. And we sort of talked about a story within there about a young gay man. And then we went through to the time when it was Henry VIII and Edward and I always want to say Gaveston, but is that the gargling mixture? Yeah. I think I'm rambling, but I'm very excited to watch the film back because it just fills me with joy and emotion because it was such a special project.
I feel like what they've done, or what these young people have done, is really create, really demonstrate the connection that existed. They breathed life and color into something that can seem very staid, and they demonstrated the way in which the historical evidence that we use can form the basis in a really authentic way for creative exploration, and those explorations being at the heart of what allows people to connect to places and draw that personal connection to a site. Elton Palace is important because of lots of things that happened there, or lots of people that went there, but as a building itself, its meaning is because of its connection to people. Mm-hmm. And its meaning today and its value today is absolutely connected to the way in which people today value it. And so if we can help people feel a sense of ownership, a sense of belonging, then that's a good thing. And I think especially when we're talking about young people, they're, what younger people today are interested in are different than what young people, 30 years ago or 200 years ago were interested in. And these places will only continue to have value if people value them. And I think that what we want to be doing is creating these platforms and empowering people to use their own voice and their own creativity to do that. And the Our House performance and all the work that the creative team, as you say, Kane, Ben, Tristram, all of the actors, all of the young people from Metro did that. They created a narrative for this place that allowed them to imprint that both on themselves, but Elton is forever changed for that work as well. Yeah,
it felt like it was a bit like landing on the moon for the first time and placing the flag. The end scene in Our House was literally full of flags and banners and posters saying, "We're here, we're proud." And it felt like they placed a flag in Elton Palace and that won't ever leave, which is extraordinary.
I think that's right. And, to have the rainbow flag flying at Elton during the performances as well was also really, really wonderful. I guess, these are some of the questions that sort of Anna and I were thinking about around what does it mean to co-curate with communities? I mean, one of the questions I have about this project, and we're going to wrap up in a minute so we can have questions from the audience, is really about, was this a co-curation project, or was it really us sort of, trying to give resource and support to the young people who really did take the lead on this? I mean, it's a devised play, and what that means, I've learned, is that all of the script, even though it was brought together by a writer, were things that the young people said, and pieces of dialogue and bits and pieces here and there from them. So there wasn't we didn't start with a script that then got modified. It all came from them.
Yeah, I think it's really an important point there, because then they felt completely a part of what the words were, because they'd said them in rehearsal. The whole sort of lead up to before they went into rehearsal was working with some of the experts and the heritage experts. So really getting to understand Elton Palace as a heritage site. So they'd been around the site as a group of young people and explored it and done the tour, and then had some meetings with some heritage experts on it. But then the important thing was, in the rehearsal, they sort of exploded those stories. There was no script. The writer sat in the room. And just to say, the writer and the director are also, young people. I say young, much younger than me. So they listened, they navigated, they steered the rehearsals to. We knew the spaces that we were sort of allowed to be in as well, and that an audience could go through. So we used the architecture of the building as well. So we were our rehearsal site was, minutes away from Elton Palace. It was an education centre next to the palace. So when the palace was closing around 4 o'clock, the young people would arrive into the palace, because it's really important with this kind of site-specific immersive work that you actually respond to the site and to the space. So they would then go on site and begin to find the stories that were within the walls, as it were, and within the spaces. And that was the devising process, really responding to the space, to the stories, to what the rooms felt like, and what might have happened in those rooms, particular spaces where they would take the audience. So yeah, it was a brilliant devising process.
Thank you, Anna. So I think we can sort of end it there. I'll put in a quick plug for this evening's panel discussion. I think there's still opportunity to register separately for that, but I'll hand over to Dan if there are any questions. I think we've got some time for questions.
We do have a few questions that have come in, which I could probably answer, which is, how do we join? Is there a way to join the Queer Heritage Collections Network? Well, there is. It's in the program, certainly, and I've dropped the link in for the program as well. Meanwhile, anybody who wants to add questions, please start adding them into the chat or the Q&A. Yeah, it is in the program. It's open to any organization that's a gallery, library, archive, museum, and GLAM organization that wants to get involved. It's open to the organization, and then via the organization, therefore, the members and the staff, the volunteers, etc. So that's how you can get involved. And I don't know if I said this before. The intro seems like a blur in my head now, but I just wanted to make sure that we acknowledge that this is supported by the Art Fund. So thank you very much to the Art Fund, and that the partnership is formed of the National Trust, English Heritage, Historic Royal Palaces, Historic England, and also the Research Centre for Museums and Galleries. We are supported by myself. I'm the co-project manager, which I'm now delighted to say that Rachael Lennon is the other co-project manager. This is her debut this next couple of days, and also supported by Kris, Reid, and Lucy Whitehead as independent researchers. Now, in terms of a question, just to get the ball rolling, I thought I'd do a bit of a quote from Richard Sandel and Matt Smith's essay called Bringing Queer Home. And I think this is quite strong and relevant for this particular chat. And it's just sort of drawing out on what you mentioned a little bit earlier, but I'll read out the quote, which is just to say that the home provided a space, albeit a semi-private one, in the case of large houses, within which queer people could make their own spaces and live the lives they wanted to. And that's very much what you're aiming to do here as well. It's bringing those echoes that have been absorbed into the ears, those walls, and bringing that back out. But can you tell me a bit about some of the things that you might have learned working with young people in terms of what their experience of home was, and then what their experience of our house, and therefore Elton Palace, as a potentially as a second home?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of briefly touched on it before, and if people are interested in talking, as Dominique said, this evening, some of the young actors will be on the panel and can speak for themselves about what it meant to them. But I think for some of the young people, and maybe the more vulnerable young people from Metro Zest, it really truly was life-changing. There were young people who were transitioning. There were young people who were not accepted at home at all for their identity, their gender, their sexuality. So to come to a space which was completely safe, and to meet other young people like them, who might have been slightly further down the road with their journey and with their sort of confidence in their identity, was quite extraordinary, and then also to have the confidence to speak in front of an audience, and that's what happened. You know, it was a big journey they went on, from young people who found it very hard to even have eye contact in the space, and found it very hard to even introduce themselves and to use their pronouns. You know, the fact that in National Youth Theatre we always do a check-in at the beginning of any day with any rehearsal process. We say our name and our pronoun, and that's part of our culture of NYT. And for these young people, it was alien, and that was a really defining marker for them, that they were allowed to say their pronoun, and that it wasn't a difficult, you know, it wasn't going to shame them, or it wasn't going to affect anything else, that they were just going to be accepted for who they were and what they wanted to be called in that space that day, or for that process. And that could change throughout the process, and for some young people it changed, their identity changed throughout the process. So I think it was a big journey, and had a huge effect on those young people. And I've noticed that there's a question about legacy, and for me the legacy of working with this particular group of young people, was about their confidence to be who they were as individuals, and that we've kept in contact with them as an organisation, and that they are supported by Metro, which is a brilliant, fantastic organisation, and also that they had met other young people like them, and that they weren't alone. And that I think is massive for, you know, for most of us who've been through challenging times of feeling the only one, or isolated, or, you know, that is the best thing for me.
Thank you. And Dominique, to you then, I suppose, on that idea of legacy, how has the legacy how has it become an embedded practice within English Heritage, and for other organizations that are thinking about doing this sort of thing as well? What advice might you have? Because would you approach it differently? Well, you'd have to approach it differently now, wouldn't you?
I mean, yeah, because of coronavirus, of course, lots of things are different. I think you know, you always, if you look back at something you've done and you think, I wouldn't change a thing, to me, that's a marker of, you know, it's a really troubling marker, you know, because there's always things you can do different. And if you can't learn from something, then you're not looking hard enough, or you're not looking at yourself hard enough. I think for us, in terms of legacy, the relationship with Metro Zest is continuing, and we continue to do projects with them and the young people. For one of the young people, James, he visits Elton Palace on a regular basis with his family and gives them tours. And it's become a place where he feels a real sense of ownership, and a real sense that this is a place that he's managed to shape. And I think that's so important, you know, that sense of pride, not just in themselves and in their work, but in a place that they feel, you know, that they've managed to acquire in their own history, in their own world, I think is really important. Broadly, I think that English Heritage has done theater in the past. Back in 2018 or 2017, we performed, we worked with a professional acting group to put on a play called Rose Liska, which was written by French prisoners of war at Portchester Castle. That was working with a very small group of actors and with an existing script. This is a complete departure from anything we've ever done before, and we're completely obsessed with it now. And as a result of our house, it's demonstrated the power of these sorts of productions, the way in which theater and these sorts of collaborations with young people can be totally transformative and address serious gaps in storytelling, you know, suppressed histories, excluded histories, forgotten histories. And so as a result, we've been working again with the National Youth Theatre through Shout Out Loud to do a project called Freedom and Revolution, which is about the Haitian Revolution, which we're still hoping to be able to perform at the end of the summer this year. And that project's been going on for about a year. And that certainly has informed the work that we've done our house certainly informed the work that we did on with Freedom Revolution, and the way in which we've approached that has been completely different. And we had to throw all our plans out the window and start from scratch because of COVID. But what we've managed to do, I think, or what the young people have managed to do, has been amazing, and I can't wait to share that. I think that this will continue to be a part of how we work as an organization. I think that we are also looking at how now these sorts of interventions can have a long-term legacy on their sites, and how we can be incorporating these elements into the interpretation on site. But we also want to make sure that we capture the spirit and words of the young people themselves, because what we don't want to do is kind of giving them this platform, giving them resource and empowering them to tell the story, their own story in their own way. I don't want to remove them or excise them from that. So how we incorporate this onto site is a challenge with theater, because it's something that happens and then it stops happening. But because of all the work that we've been doing with digital, I think we're a lot more confident and a lot more creatively thinking about how that can be. So I'd say look out for changes. I think it's going to be a slow process, not because of the subject matter, but just because of the nature, the environment that we're in at the moment. Things are very challenging, and the indoor spaces of lots of our sites have had to be closed in various points during the pandemic for safety reasons and that sort of thing. But we are definitely committed to to incorporating this material into our interpretation. It's really important.
In some ways, I suppose that's about managing risk. And from the outside, this might seem like it would be a venture that is about managing risk, because it is quite a grand idea. So we've got a few minutes left. I thought if I could start with Anna and then Dominique, which is just for those who are now kind of thinking, oh, look at that UK Heritage Award, doesn't that look good? Maybe I might think about doing something like this as well now. What advice would you have for somebody from a heritage organisation that now thinks that this might actually be a good way to look at history, heritage, and interpret it?
I would say National Youth Theatre is always up for collaboration, so we're open to partnerships. We're very much about partnerships, and completely believe that by pulling together different organisations and from different worlds, as it were, you get a richer, deeper project. I would say it's about really drilling down to understand what it is you want, what story you want to tell, and by whom, and who is it for, what's the audience, who's going to animate that story, and why is it relevant now, is what I would say. It's all about sort of now in a way, like, why is this story needed to be told? What is the story that needs to be told, and who should it be told by, and who is it for? That's where I would start. And I think getting different brains on it, as Dominique said, we're working on Portchester Castle, and that's a completely different project with a completely different group of young people, and also Warwick University, and getting academics involved into sort of really unveiling some of the more hidden history specifically for Black enslaved people in Portchester. So we've got a really fantastic Black company of young women, because we're doing a female-led project with that company, doing that. So I would say, yeah, thinking about why, who it's for. Yeah, I won't repeat myself again.
I think from my perspective, in terms of risk, from an institutional perspective, I think that it's really important to bring as many people with you on that journey and understand really what everybody's concerns are, and then work with your partners to try to mitigate that. I mean, that's kind of basic partnership working anyway. It feels scarier with theater because, and especially when you're handing over the reins to other people, because, and we're not particularly good at sharing, I think, in sort of in the curatorial department, and really trusting people to tell their own stories and working with them to understand the limitations of the spaces you're talking about and what their requiremits are, and understanding how this is going to enhance and really bring to life things which are can otherwise feel a bit stale. I think the other element of the risk is you're asking people to take on a lot of new stuff all in one go. And that is a really, really difficult, that's a big management task from a kind of management perspective. And so I think giving people space to come to terms with and learn and increase their own skills in relation to this is something that is also important. So if you can kind of remove some of the normal day-to-day stuff to give people space to kind of learn, I think it's important, because there's no training course you can go on to understand how to put on a theater production at in your museum or in your in your heritage site. So people are kind of learning as they go. And I think you need to be flexible, you need to be understanding. And then there's kind of personal risk as well, because when you're talking about suppressed histories or hidden histories, you're often talking about trauma, and people will have their own personal trauma. And of course, it's right to focus on the young people involved. But we happen to have been a very kind of queer heavy management group around it as well. And it was, incredibly emotional. I found it incredibly emotional. I cried the whole time. I'm a crier though. But I so you need to make sure your staff has that space as well for themselves. And I think it's about understanding all of that and then trying to create space, because there's going to be new challenges that you won't have been able to predict, because every space is different, every group of people is different. So I think it's about being flexible, being understanding, but the key, I think, is absolutely believing in what you're doing and making sure that you've got that belief, because I think if you believe in it, you can bring your organization with you. And I think understanding the organization's requirements. History is there to be interpreted. History isn't a series of facts, it's arguments that historians have with each other over all kinds of things. And I think we're not great, the tools we have with panels, it's not great. It's not a great place to have a kind of historical argument or explore nuance, but theater is. So I think that it's about understanding how we frame that in terms of our own interpretative priorities and organizational work to tell histories of the past.
I think also, just to add to that, I think you said the word trust, and I think that's it's a key point in a partnership, in this, specifically in this partnership, and also to know that what you're bringing to the table, each organization or each partner, is knowledge and expertise, and to be able to trust that partner to own that part of it. And that creates a really good methodology of working. And also, I would say time, so that the lead-in time before a project is really crucial to really get to know your partners and to really understand everybody's requirements and the inside of everybody's head of what this might look like or sound like or feel like.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Anna. I am going to wrap us. So Dominique, I've got one question that's coming in from Hannah Sands, she, they, and I just wanted to challenge you to answer this in 30 seconds or less. Hannah's question is about partnerships, and it's just about the Queer Heritage and Collections Network. How did this partnership form? So
it was at the Horace Walpole sort of queer studies conference at Strawberry Hill House quite a while ago, and I think all of the organizations that were the founding members were all sort of standing there having a coffee and talking about how amazing the conference was and how important it would be to do something. And it just kind of emerged, sort of fully grown, from the collective brow of Horace Walpole, is what I would say is the most brilliant answer. I think, we got together. It was clearly something that was really important and felt like, we needed to have a group of organizations that could provide resource support and try to lead something. So there we go.
Thank you very much. I think that was about 30 seconds. Well done. So we have got a session coming up in about 10 minutes with Sean Curran hosting on behalf of Historic England. And the speakers will be Alison Oram and EJ Scott. And they're going to be talking about how do we find queer connections in our collections. So that's going to be amazing. So please go back to the program. The next link is in the program, as well as a bit of a summary of the session that's coming up. Also, there is that trailer that you saw before. If you want to start sharing it, there is a YouTube link to the English Heritage site that has got that trailer. So you can tell everybody about this amazing panel discussion, Q&A, but also a very exclusive screening that we've got coming up of our house tonight at 7 o'clock. I will make sure that above the trailer that is in that program, there will be a link to the Eventbrite. So there's about 50 seats remaining. So if anybody wants to come for tonight, there are about 50 seats remaining. So thank you very much again to Dominique, to Anna. Thank you so much both. And everybody, we will see you again in about 10 minutes time. So thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Dan.
Nice to see you, Anna.
And you, Dominique.
Bye-bye.
Bye.